President, please be seated. The court is now in session, and the chamber gives the floor to the defense team for Mr. Kisafon to resume the questioning. You may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Morris. Before we went on break, we were talking of the issue of the offensive, which I call the Vietnamese diplomatic offensive. I would like to follow up on a point regarding non-aligned countries. I quoted to you this morning a report by the Australian Embassy saying that for Vietnam it was important to be recognized by the United Nations and within the framework of non-aligned countries. Can you briefly explain why it was important? And still with regard to the Cold War, what were the stakes for Vietnam to be a member of the non-aligned countries?
Well, diplomatically, it was important for Vietnam because in the competition for international legitimacy for what their plans were for Cambodia, it would be helpful to have the non-aligned movement on its side.
Un autre point sur
Another point regarding Vietnam's diplomatic relations. What were relations with Eastern Germany?
I assume you're talking about in the late 1970s? Well, in any case, the relations with East Germany certainly were very close.
par rapport à
As regards what you refer to as Vietnam's propaganda as part of its preparation for that offensive and its invasion of Cambodia, we have on record a report that specifically is on discussions regarding relations between Vietnam and Cambodia, and it is document E3/1773. And this document is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Germany, GDA in English. And there are several reports dated early January 1978, and I would like to read out an extract to you with a view to find out whether it would elicit any reaction from you regarding the dissemination of a German report at the time. The report that's of interest to me, the ERN in English is 01246920. And this report is dated the 2nd of January 1978. There may be an error. It's in English, the 1st of February 1978. In any case, this is what is stated in the document, and it is in English.
between 4th and 11th January, SRV, je suppose pour South Republic.
I suppose it is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam.
So SRV representative in socialist brother countries, developing countries and capitalist industrial nations, disseminated the declaration of the SRV government of 31 December 77, reproduced verbatim in the 11/1/78 issue of Horizon. Socialist brother countries expressed their support for the position of SRV. The People's Republic of China supports the DK position inasmuch it published primarily the slander directed at the SRV in the DK government declaration of 31 December 77, 31st, sorry. The SRV officially conveyed to the People's Republic of China its displeasure at the reporting and requested that the record on developments in the conflict be set straight. At the beginning of the conflict, the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, favored the DK declaration in its published material. The SRV ambassador objected to the inaccurate reporting. End of quote. Et je vais citer.
I will also read out to you a second passage. For the French interpreters, it's in French. The ERN is 01246922. And it's still with regard to the German memo, and it's indicated as follows in English.
And the CSSR, Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, have supported the SRV's position in brother organizations' publication. End of quote. Ce qui est intéressant dans
First of all, it's interesting to know whether you know that document, and if you do not know that document, you think it corresponds to what you saw during your research as regards the different statements that were disseminated by Vietnam to present its own version of the events.
I am not familiar with that document, but I am aware that not only China, but also Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, was aligned with Democratic Kampuchea at this time. And so they were taking the side of Democratic Kampuchea in the conflict with Vietnam.
dans ce document,
In this document, we have a description of the fact that the statements of the 31st of December 1977 were massively disseminated by Vietnam, not only within the non-aligned movement and countries that sided with it, but also to other countries. And is this something that you found in your research, and which you found in the Soviet archives, which you had to consult?
I didn't find information pertaining to this in the Soviet archives, but I was aware of the propaganda campaign that Vietnam was launching. In fact, both sides were launching, Vietnam and Democratic Kampuchea, to try and win international support for their positions.
Sur la position
As regards Vietnam's diplomatic position vis-à-vis that of Cambodia, I understand by this privileged relations. Would you say that it was easier for Vietnam to approach the non-aligned countries, and that it was more accustomed to do so and was more experienced to do so as regards the diplomatic management of its position in relation to Cambodia, or you have another position as regards that?
It was probably easier for Vietnam to approach the non-aligned community because Vietnam had a wider variety of diplomatic relations, a history of diplomatic relations, than Democratic Kampuchea. Democratic Kampuchea restricted itself to, as I recall, some 8 countries with which it had diplomatic ties. The 2 close ones were, of course, People's Republic of China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But there were other countries, I think Egypt was one, and several other countries which maintained some kind of diplomatic relations with Democratic Kampuchea. But Vietnam had far more extensive diplomatic relations, and hence would have found it easier to have an impact.
Un autre point, est-ce que...
Another point, can you tell the Chamber whether you knew the conditions that were set for both sides to initiate negotiations while engaging in diplomatic war and the war on the field? Both countries said they were willing to negotiate under certain conditions at any point in time. Do you know the conditions that were laid down by either party?
I've actually forgotten what the conditions were laid down at that time.
Dans ce même document,
In the same document, I beg your pardon, the ERN is 01246921. I don't think that's where it is. I will find the document and we'll move to another line of questioning in the meantime. You referred to Vietnam's willingness. That was in answer to questions put to you by the prosecutor, its willingness to negotiate. And at least that is what I understood, and I stand corrected if I was wrong. You said that, in your opinion, it was Democratic Kampuchea that systematically refused to negotiate. Did I properly understand your position? Did you mean something else?
I think that Vietnam was certainly willing to negotiate in 1977. It changed its mind at the end of 1977. The conditions laid down by both sides, as I have a vague memory of that, were conditions which the other side might find difficult to comply with. So I think that my view is that there was a battle for the hearts and minds of various foreign countries by both sides in their diplomatic stance towards each other.
Vous avez évoqué ce document.
You refer to this document in answer to questions put to you by my colleague of the non-chair team, and I believe the co-prosecutors as well. That is the report of Douglas Pike before Congress, the document E3/2370. And that document sums up the position of both sides, and this is what is said in French, 00344745, and the ERN in English, 001879393. And this is what is stated in the document. The Vietnamese state, and say so preemptorily that they would not evacuate their forces before negotiations start. The Cambodians refused to start negotiations so long as the Vietnamese forces haven't left the country. This situation can be circumvented. Vietnam can withdraw its forces, insisting on the fact that it had never invaded Cambodia, and the Cambodians can assert that they had driven out the Vietnamese without that being the case, and that they would therefore be in a position to negotiate, but not easily. End of quote.
President, the expert, please hold on. You may now proceed. International Co-Prosecutor.
I just think it's important to clarify that the questions that were asked by me yesterday and this morning dealt with Vietnamese willingness to negotiate before the late 1998 invasion, and this is clearly discussing negotiations after the invasion.
Il n'y a pas de souci.
There are no problems with that. I believe that on each occasion I specify the dates of the document, and I think therefore that the expert knows what I'm referring to, and he did point out that the position of Vietnam had changed, and so there shouldn't be any problem. On this particular issue regarding Vietnam's position in early 1978, I have another document, and then I'll put my question in broader terms, and it is an extract of the book by Nayan Chanda, The Enemy, E3/2376, ERN in French 00237080, in Khmer 00191550, ERN in English 0019222401. And this is what Nayan Chanda states. On the 5th of February 1978, Radio Hanoi made public a draft plan to resolve the Cambodian problem in 3 points: withdrawal by 5 kilometers of the forces, signing of a treaty of non-aggression, international monitoring of the border. We knew, according to a Vietnamese official who admitted before me, that the Khmer Rouge would never accept such a position, but at least the responsibility of the rejection of that project would be their responsibility. The matter is subject to a major media war. The Vietnamese plan is judged by them as being reasonable. Phnom Penh, as envisaged, rejected it with scorn, and it's a maneuver of intimidation, and they are trying to influence public international opinion. End of quote. So when you relate the documents from West Germany, from East Germany, Douglas Pike's report, the extract from Nayan Chanda's book, do you think this corresponds to what you saw in your research? Notably that in early 1978, the Vietnamese, in any case, according to Nayan Chanda, laid down conditions for negotiations that were not acceptable to the Cambodians because their decision was taken as of that date to invade Cambodia. In any case, to have recourse to a final solution to the problem which involved invading the country.
I think that, as I said before, by the beginning of 1978, both sides were fairly well entrenched in their positions and were conducting negotiate or diplomatic positions that would affect the opinion of the rest of the world. With regard to Vietnam's intentions at that time, I'm not sure that Vietnam had decided in early 1978 definitely to invade. I think that they first were hoping for an insurrection to overthrow the regime. And when that didn't pan out, when that didn't show any effectiveness, then they decided that they would have to invade. So there was certainly a decision made by the Vietnamese sometime in 1978 to overthrow the regime of Democratic Kampuchea, but by what method, it changed. For the Vietnamese to be sure that they could invade, they needed to know that they could be protected against Chinese retaliation. And therefore, they had to secure a relationship with the Soviet Union which would protect them against an all-out invasion by China of Vietnam. So I think that everything was not perfectly set up at the beginning of 1978. It evolved throughout 1978.
Et pour être complète,
And for the purposes of completion, in the interest of the Chamber and parties, the document I was looking for, document E3/773, ERN in English 01246919, and in Khmer 013206, and it continues on the following page. And this is what is stated in English.
were reiterated in a letter from the DK leadership to the government of SRV, an end to aggression on land and at sea, an end to interference in the internal affairs of democratic Kampuchea and to attempts to topple the government, relinquishment of the idea of establishing an Indochina Federation, and respect for the right to self-determination. Fin de citation. Donc c'était.
End of quote. These were the conditions that were laid down. Since I have very little time left, I would like to end on the subject of paranoia. You stated that the position consisting in overthrowing the government forcibly on the side of Vietnam was a strategy that can be understood, but that nevertheless the willingness to remain on Cambodian territory after the victory of the Vietnamese forces and their Cambodian allies was a decision stemming from paranoia also on the part of Vietnam. I'm trying to sum up what you said, and please correct me if I'm summing up what you said wrongly. You said it was a result of Vietnamese paranoia vis-à-vis China, and you use that term profusely, saying that it was a component of Marxist-Leninist regimes and totalitarian regimes in general. My question to you, therefore, is as follows. Do you use that term exclusively for such regimes as part of the Cold War, within the framework of the Cold War, or from an ideological standpoint, there are no other issues other than paranoia? Was that notion of paranoia not valid for both camps?
When you speak of both camps, to whom are you referring?
Oui. C'est vrai que je devrais être...
It is true that I ought to be more specific. I'm talking of the socialist communist camp on the one hand and the Western camp, so to speak.
No, I don't think that paranoia was frequently a characteristic of Western policy towards the socialist countries. I think that there were real concerns about behavior of certain socialist countries, most notably the Soviet Union, in various parts of the world, especially after 1975, after the collapse of the American position in Indochina, that the Soviet Union became an aggressive power, and I don't think that was paranoia. In fact, there were many efforts prior to that, or even during that time, to try and negotiate differences with the Soviet Union. And the assumption was always that there were reasonable people on the other side with whom one could negotiate. So I don't think that the Western powers were permeated by paranoia. And the manifestations of the paranoia, which is aggressiveness towards various segments of the population, as well as various foreign states, was not characteristic. I'm thinking, you know, there were no S-21s, you know, in the United States or in Britain or in France. So I would say that, of course, at some points, and within the West, there were people who were paranoid. Yes, there were people, and some governments tended a little more in that direction, but nothing on the scale of what we're talking about with regard to some of the revolutionary states. And I think that I tried to lay out in my book examples of where there was terrible misjudgment of the objective situation that we understood because of this paranoid outlook, a refusal to believe that some things happen accidentally, for example, and also this whole idea that if there is a threat, there must be some kind of conspiratorial involvement. I tried to make it clear in my book that for example, the Vietnamese wrongly saw the Chinese as pushing democratic Kampuchea in the direction it was heading in its foreign policy, and that was not. There's no evidence of that. I think democratic Kampuchea conducted its foreign policy for its own reasons without Chinese prodding, and in fact, during 1978, the Chinese tried to restrain democratic Kampuchea in its behavior, foreign policy behavior, because it feared what actually eventually would happen, that is, the Vietnamese would invade. I think the Vietnamese also, you know, the Vietnamese misperceived democratic Kampuchea, and I think democratic Kampuchea misperceived Vietnam to some extent, even though, as I've also made the point, Vietnam had imperial ambitions with regard to Cambodia. They had been thwarted in part by Pol Pot, and I think that with the elimination of the Khmer Viet Minh during the early 70s, and I think that Vietnam was constrained by its fear of Chinese retaliation, which was a rational fear. So, you know, was there paranoia in the world? Yes, there's paranoia all over the world, but not on the scale of revolutionary states. Amongst the leadership.
And because I don't have much time left, one last example. Would you use the same idea of paranoia to refer to Indonesia?
Well, that was as a result of the. You're referring to what happened in the mid-1960s, presumably. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, there was. Because there was actually a conspiracy against Indonesia from the Communist Party of Indonesia, a conspiracy to try and seize power. But in responding to it, the regime went completely out of control in terms of it's the thrust of its killing of especially of ethnic Chinese. So yes, the paranoia did exist in Indonesia. I was not arguing that paranoia is the exclusive characteristic of revolutionary states. I'm only stating that it's inherent in them.
Et le dernier point.
The last point. I know, Mr. President, I promise this is my last question. Regarding the political choices or beliefs or choices that certain states could made on the possibility of questioning oneself, do you think that that's something that's inherent in Marxist-Leninist regimes? I'm thinking about, for example, a difficulty in recognizing colonial massacres by France at one time, about the choice of using on Hiroshima and Nagasaki the atomic bomb by the United States, etc. When one has made a drastic choice and one is within one's ideology, is it complicated or challenging to recognize one's errors or that one's choices have caused thousands or even more deaths, even if that was not the intention at the beginning?
You're asking me, is it reasonable to recognize that one's actions can cause enormous suffering even if it wasn't the intention to do so? Is that your question? That various governments have carried, non-revolutionary states have carried out actions which have caused a lot of suffering, which was, even if it was not the intention. Is that your question?
C'était à peu près ça, en fait.
It's more or less that. My question, in fact, was regardless of the ideology of the people who have been in power and taken decisions at some point in time, decisions which caused enormous suffering against a population, is it not always difficult for these authorities or powers or former powers to recognize their portion of responsibility, their share in responsibility, or to recognize that that choice led to disaster?
Et c'est pour ça que je prenais.
And that's why I noted the examples of other countries.
Yes, it is often difficult for governments to recognize that their policies can lead to disasters. Various countries.
Monsieur le Président, je sens que j'ai...
Mr. President, I think I've pressed my luck and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Council. And the hearing of testimony of the expert Stephen Morris is now concluded, and Mr. Professor, the Chamber is grateful of your testimony since you traveled a very long distance from overseas to testify before this court with effort and patience. Your testimony may contribute to the ascertainment of the truth in this case. You are no longer required to be present in the courtroom, and for that reason you may return to your residence. And the Chamber wishes you all the very best. and success in your future endeavor, and bon voyage. Court officer, please work with Visu to make necessary transport arrangement for the professor to his accommodation. And Professor, you are now excused. And court officer, please usher the civil party into the courtroom. President, good afternoon, Madam Civil Party. What is your name? Civil Party, good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Priep Sokun. President, thank you. And when were you born? Answer. In my identity card, it states that I was born on 12 October 1951. However, my real birth was the year of monkey. Question, and where were you born? Answer, I was born in Andong Tapai village, Thmapun commune, Preacher district, Kampong Cham province. Question, where is your current address? And please observe the microphone before you respond. Answer, I am residing in Andong Tapai village, Thmapun commune, Preacher district, Kampong Cham province. That is my same native village. Question, what is your current occupation? And again, please observe the microphone. Answer, at present I'm a rice farmer and I'm also a member of the commune council. Question, what are the names of your parents? Answer, my father is Priep Long and my mother is Pik Yun. Question, are you married? If so, what is your husband's name? And again, please observe the microphone. Answer, I got married to a man arranged by my parents and his name is Am Kom In. Question, how many children do you have? Answer, we have 2 children. Both are daughters. Madam Priep Sokun, toward the end of your testimony, you will be given an opportunity to make your statement of harm and suffering, that is, harms inflicted upon you during the Democratic Cambodia period if you wish to do so. And Madam Pripsokun, have you been interviewed by investigators from the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges? If so, how many times, when, and where? Answer. Initially, I was interviewed at ad hoc, and I apologize. Before that, I was interviewed, and I was invited and interviewed by Chang Yu. Later on, I lodged my complaint with ad hoc, and subsequently, I met on several occasions with my lawyer. Question: have you been interviewed by OCIG investigators? And again, Madam Civil Party, please observe the microphone. You can speak a bit further from the microphone. That is okay for you. Answer. I came here once, but it was at the other building. Question. And before you appear before us, have you read or reviewed the written record of your interview you provided through the OCIG investigators in order to refresh your memory? Answer. Yes, I have read and reviewed the record. I also read it when I was at home, and I reviewed it again when I am here. Question. And to your best knowledge and recollection, can you tell the Chamber whether the written record of your interview with the investigators that you have read to refresh your memory is consistent with the interview you provided previously? Answer. Regarding the date of my wedding, I could not recall exactly, so it was an estimate only. President, thank you. And pursuant to Rule 91B of the ECCC internal rules, the Chamber hands the floor first to the lead co-lawyers for civil parties before other parties. And the combined time for the lead co-lawyers and the co-prosecutors is 2 sessions. And you can have the floor now. Good afternoon, Mr. President, judges. We seek your permission to grant the floor to Counsel Lajunti to put questions to civil party Pripsokun. President, yes, he may proceed. Lajunti, thank you, Mr. President. And good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, judges and parties. My name is Lajunti. I am a civil party lawyer. I am from Legal Aid of Cambodia. And I have some questions to put to Madam Pripsokun. That is in regards to her experience through Democratic Cambodia from 17 April 1975 through 6 January 1979. And Madam Civil Party, to start with, allow me to seek clarification from you. You made mention to the President in relation to your date of birth. the date of birth in your identity card and your year of birth that you just told the President. Can you tell the Chamber what is the reason for you to use that date of birth on your identity card? Answer, allow me to respond. When I made my identity card, I told the officer that I was born in the year of a monkey, but I cannot recall the month. And then he asked me to try to recall the month that I was born. And as a result, that was the dates that he put on the identity card. And for that reason, I used that as my official date of birth. Question. Does it mean that the date of birth on the identity card and your actual age is different? Is that correct? Answer. If I count my age based on the date of birth in the identity card, that is 12 October 51, that is, I am older than my actual age because actually I was born in the year of monkey. Question, how old are you then this year? Answer. Currently, I am 62 years old. Question. Allow me to ask some questions regarding your background. A little bit before 1975, what did you do or what did you join in? Answer. Before 1975, in the cooperative, I was assigned to be in an art performance group, and later on I was assigned to carry food supplies to the battlefield in Kampong Cham. And by 75, when Phnom Penh was liberated, we were gathered and sent to live in the unions to engage in the cotton plantation. Question. When you went to work at the cotton plantation, can you tell the Chamber its location? Answer. The union that was established in 1975, it was at Ondong Talang in Tmapun commune. Question. And in which province? Answer. That is in Kampong Cham province. Question. What were you assigned to do in that particular location? Answer. Allow me to respond. Initially, I was sent to live in that union, and we were still allowed to live in different groups, and we were given 2 cans of rice per day, and that we were assigned to clear forest so that we could plant cotton trees. question. And when will you organize or arrange to get married? Answer. Regarding the marriage, I cannot recall it clearly because there was nothing for me to refer to in terms of the date. However, at that time, cotton fruits were ripe, and one day I was sent to clear the forest, and while I was there in the afternoon, a messenger came to call me, and Comrade Lee asked me whether I respect the Angkar's order or not, and I said that I lived under the leadership of Angkar, so that I respected Angkar's orders all the time, and also said if Angkar instructed me to go into a crab hole, I would do that. Question. After you were asked those questions, what happened next? Answer. After I was asked those questions I were not instructed that I should prepare myself for the marriage. They did not tell me that, and I did not know the reason why I were asked those questions. So next morning at 6 o'clock, I went back to the plantation, and a little bit before noontime, a messenger called me that why I went to the plantation and not to go to Comrade Soul's office, and I said that I was not told about that. Then the messenger called me to return. Then I walked with the messenger, and I went to my sleeping quarter. Then Comrade Lini came to me and asked me why I did not go and pick up clothes to go to attend the event. And I said I did not know anything about the event. Then I was given a pant and a shirt and a scarf. Question. When you were called from the plantation, how many people actually were called to attend that wedding? Answer. On the day that I was called from the plantation, I was the only one. That is what happened in my unit, and I could not say about other units. Because in the units, when people were older or reach a certain age, then we were called to get married, and that's happened to me in my case. So I was given a set of clothes. Then I went to the venue. I saw some women there. Some were weeping, so I wept as well. And as I said, after the marriage, I did not find any happiness at all, and there was only sadness. Question. Did they tell you as to whom you would be married to? For example, the names of where he came from? Answer. When I was called to get married, I was not told that I would get married to this man or that man or where he came from. And only when we were called to attend the meeting, they educated us about the targets of Angkar, and the women were instructed to sit in a row while the men were instructed to sit in a separate row. Question. During the time that you get married, how many couples got married at that time? And who were the dignitaries or who actually organized the wedding? Answer. There were representatives from the big units who were there with the chief of the union, and the chief of the union was the top person who chaired the wedding. Then they announced the names. If there was our name and then the name of the man, it means that we had to stand up, and that we would be husband and wife. At the time, I was known as poor. And the man who became my husband named Cao. So when the name Cao and Paul were called, then although we did not know each other before, we had to remember the names, and that we, for example, when the man stood up first, we had to stand up as well. Question. Did they not prepare you and the men to sit facing one another in a row? Answer. The men were sitting on one side, and we were sitting on the other side, and in between there was a long table, and across it there were Anka representatives. And we did not know that we would get married at that time. We were weeping. We wanted to have the presence of our parents. And the table there was like the table used in this class. Then when the names are called, for example, Cao and Paul, and then another set of names were called, then we would stand up and we go to sit at that table. Question. Do you recall whether during the marriage ceremony you were required to make a commitment? Answer. During my marriage, we were not allowed to make a commitment. However, there was a woman representing the women, and then there was a man representing the men. And the representatives spoke about the party's directions, and we only sat there listening to them. Question. Did I hear you that there were participants? Does that mean that your parents and relatives were allowed to attend your marriage? Answer. During the wedding, none of my parents or relatives attended the meeting. There were only representatives of big units, that is, our representatives, and the representatives from the men's units were there. And the representatives spoke on our behalf in terms of our commitment while we were sitting and listening to them. Question. After the conclusion of the wedding ceremony, what were you told to do? Answer. After the wedding ceremony, and they made a long building, and the building was partitioned into separate rooms, and we were instructed to live in that room. And we were not allowed to sleep elsewhere, and all the married couples had to sleep in that long building.
Question. Were you instructed to consummate your marriage, or were you under surveillance? Surveillance. Yeah.
សម័យហ្នឹងបើ
After we got married, we were under surveillance from the window outside, and we were told to stay together and consummate our marriage. They conducted a surveillance the whole night. When we walked outside the room, we saw them there, and if I went outside for a very long time, I would be asked where I was going. I frequently told them that I went out to the restroom. Question. How long did you stay together?
ចា
Answer. After the marriage, we were allowed to stay together for 3 nights, and we then were allowed to see each other once a month. Question. During the 3 days, did you consummate your marriage? I mean, did you have sexual intercourse with your husband?
ចា
Answer. I did not have any feeling to have sexual intercourse with the man whom I did not love. When he was sleeping, I would sit up, and if he sat up, I would sleep on the floor. One day, I was very exhausted and tired, and I laid myself on the floor. He, on that night, put one of his hands on my body, and I held his hand firmly, and I told him that I was committed not to allowing anyone to touch my body and my arms. And at the time, the marriage was not held under the strict custom and tradition of my country, so I did not allow him to touch me. Question. Until when could you get along with your husband?
ចាខ្ញុំនៅសហ
In fact, I never had any sexual intercourse with my husband because I could evade from one location to another, and when my husband, in fact, sometimes was asked by his colleagues why he got a scar on his hand. One day, there was a ox cart coming to collect me. That happened at 10 p.m. And during the night, I protested that I would not go alone during that period. If someone was taken by the ox cart, they would disappear. I protested at the time. Seeing my protest, they allowed to have Sophia in my company. We were together on the horse cart until we reached Prey Toteng. Then we were told to stay overnight in a house of the villager. And the day after, I was told to go to the house which was in charge of making palm sugar. On that day, there were Tahom and Yekim, and they said that, comrade, after the marriage, you have to have a sexual intercourse, otherwise you would be killed. They repeatedly said that to me. In the evening, they asked my husband to write me to another location. And on that day, I was put in a house on the other side of the road. And I told that grandma, not to go away and leave me alone. She was sitting together with me and chit-chatted with me. And a little bit later, my husband climbed up the house. On that night, my husband was trying to convince me, but I did not allow him to touch my body. And sometime I jumped out of the house and I could see there was a person around the house. And there was one day at night I went to take a bath, and there was a youth coming and seeing me taking the water, and I was offered to help to bring the water for me. And a little bit later, I was told to go up into the house. And then my husband convinced me to sleep. And I slept very tightly on that night. And when I woke up, I saw his hands on my body. And on that day, he tore my clothes, my shirt, my trousers, and took off my bra, and then he raped me. I was shouting at the time, and he asked me not to shout because he said that he and I became husband and wife already. That was the first day that he raped me.
បាទអរគុណអញ្ចឹងចាប់មានន័យថាចាប់ពីពេល
Question. So you mean that from that time, it was that day that you had intercourse with him. Is that correct?
ចាខ្ញុំ
Answer. After I was raped, I returned to live in the cooperative or state or union, said the civil party, and we separated from one another after that day. Question. What happened next? Did you observe that you had any symptom in relation to your health?
ក្រោយមក
I was in the union, and my union later on was dismantled. Seeing that, my husband asked the permission to have me live together with him. I was convinced, and I went to live with him at the Boys Krang Batie district. I lived there with him, and 1 month later I became sick, and perhaps I had the morning sick, but I did not know about that. And I was then sent to the hospital in the commune at Gilia, and currently it is on the opposite side of the road. After staying in the hospital for a few days, I became better, and then I was sent to Batie. I was once again put in a location at Batie because of my illness. I did not have any medicines to drink, and I did not have enough water to drink. And I was then referred to the hospital in the sector in Kampong Cham. Question. When did you know that you were pregnant? After I was sent to the hospital in the sector, I was diagnosed that I was pregnant, so I was put in that sector's hospital. Question. What did they do to you after they learned that you were pregnant, or did you allow to go to work as normal? I was then discharged of the hospital. I stayed in the hospital for a period of half a month, and I was told by my mother not to go to live at Nol Kaing. My mother asked her to stay with me, although she was transferred to a new cooperative. In fact, my mother was told to go and ask permission from the village so that she could stay with me. She then decided to go on a bicycle to go and ask for the permission. After she got the permission letter, she gave to the unit chief in that cooperative, and then she was allowed to stay with me in the cooperative. Question. You said you were pregnant. And what about your husband? Where was he sent to, or did they allow him to stay with you? Answer. We did not live together during the period. When I was in the cooperative, my husband was assigned to raise ducks. For me, I was put in my cooperative in charge of cooking rice with the banana stem for people to eat. Although we were put in the cooperative, but we did not live together and stay together. We worked and lived in different places. President, it is now time for break. The chamber will take break from now until 3 p.m. Court officer, please find a waiting room for the civil party during the break time, and please invite her back into the courtroom at 3 p.m. The court is now in recess.